So the things you're going to need is obviously the demon eyes, 2 different size flathead screwdrivers, you need a 10mm socket, you need the ratchet, a Phillips head screwdriver, and then obviously the light itself and an oven. So obviously the first thing you have to do is remove the front bumper. So in our case, because I already have the demon eyes installed and this is the one that broke, I'm only going to be replacing this one, but the setup is going to be pretty much the same. Bumper is going to come off completely, so you can remove both. So we're going to remove the light and then proceed to split it and actually install the new demon eyes in them. Now to remove the headlight, you have to remove the bolts that are attaching it to the car. In my case, I have 10mm bolts right here, as well as one back here. That'll be able to bring the entire light out. I tend to like to bring out the entire cage with the light as well, because it's just a lot easier to get back in than sliding your light in and potentially damaging part of your fender here. And there we go, we got the light out. So let's put the demon on. So I usually get a baking sheet that's big enough for the actual light itself, put down a little bit of aluminum foil, and then I set my oven usually to the lowest that the oven can go, but I found that you only need to go between about 170 to 210 to actually get the silicone inside these lights to come out. You can actually buy extra silicone to put in if you end up taking too much out. So put this in for about 10 or 15 minutes. You don't have to remove any of the hardware because the hardware will not damage itself at 170. So leave it in for 10 minutes, and when it's done, we'll pull it back out.
15 minutes later.
So now that it's out of the oven, the first thing you need to do is remove all the screws from the outside of the lens here. I use one of the hot pads on my leg to not have the lens burn myself, and then I have a hot pad on my hand here. You need a Phillips screwdriver to remove all of these. So now that I have all the screws out, I'm going to take my flatheads and slowly start pushing away the lens. You don't want to be too aggressive with this because you can very easily crack either the lens or the housing. So I usually work starting from the tabs and slowly pull away the lens from the housing. The idea is to separate the silicone that's holding it, which is already soft, so it means it'll come apart very easily. The easiest place to start is most likely from this side, because this side the lens pushes into indented section here. Once you have most of it off, you slowly just pry away the rest. Now this would also be a good time if you were thinking about blacking out the actual piece on the inside. All you have to do is actually remove the screws here, then just do a light scuffing and black spray. I like to use gloss on the inside, but then it'll give you roughly the same effect. Later on, I'm going to be doing these red to kind of match the blue and red theme with the car. So now you can set this aside because you're not going to do it anymore. And from this point, we're going to start working on this housing. So in order to put everything in here, you don't have to remove this section right here. It's recommended to do it just to have a little bit more space to work with. But all you have to do is get the demon eye in one of these sides. In this case, really going through the bottom, and that's the easiest place to actually install it. So I'm going to remove this one, and then we're going to start the steps over as if I was doing this for the first time. So the next step is to epoxy the actual demon light itself into the eye. Now through trial and error, I found there's one method that tends to work very well, and it is putting it laying flat directly under the projector here. So what you're going to do is there's going to be a hole at the bottom of the housing right here. that's where you're going to insert the light. When you mix these together, you have a short period of time until they will become hard, in which it behaves just like a little gel. And all you do is put a little of each tube, and then you mix them together. You're going to place a decent amount on the back of the demon eye. I usually don't go below the logos right here, just so that when it spreads out it doesn't get anywhere it's not supposed to. And you can always put a little bit more on, but don't put too much where it'll come around the other side and start affecting the lights. But just a light layer kind of spread out should be good. And then I'm going to put it down, and I want the entire flat surface to touch the inside of the housing. I'm probably going to hold this here, I'd say probably about 2 minutes or so, until the epoxy itself can hold it down. And then once the epoxy is actually set somewhat, I'm going to let it go.
24 hours later.
So we put it back onto our tray, and you can do it one of two ways. You can have two trays, one for each lens, or what I like to do is just lightly place this lens on top and making sure that you slide it into this part up here because it's a cavity. And this is just so that it's roughly in the right position, so all I have to do is press them together. So we're going to put it back in the oven for about 10 to 15 minutes at the same temperature.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
So now what we want to do is get all of these tabs pushed back in, so that'll be locked in to where we want it. We want to put this rubber grommet back in, and then we want to just make sure everything's sealed up real nice. So after you've installed the lights, you need to install the Bluetooth controller. All this takes is a simple connection to the positive end of the battery, the negative end, and then you have your different ports here. You have your main power line right here, and then you have 3 different ways that you can do it. One benefit of this being that you can have 2 lights connected to one thing, lights connected to different ones, and you can control each individually if you have them wired up to these. But for right now, I'm just going to wire them up to the same one. So you have your 2 driver boxes right here. The white connection goes to the connection coming out of the Demon, and the black connection goes to the black clip coming out of the driver itself. I like to zip tie mine together, but for the side that we're replacing, I'm going to have to run it out. Accessory wire can go over there, and then all I have to do is connect these 2 together. Now they're both working. So the original reason why I had to replace these was the connection down here ended up getting corroded. So it's a very good idea to either wrap these in electrical tape or to store it in a place where it's not going to see any moisture whatsoever, because you don't want to have to replace these like I had to. So for now, I'm going to do some cable management myself later. You can decide how you want to do it in your engine bay. I'm just going to tuck mine under the radiator shroud right here. Now I'm completely wired up and both the lights work, so now let's cut to the cinematic bit.